What if people living together in towns didn't start 5,000 years ago? What if it started over again? What if everything we call ancient is really the dark time after something much older fell apart? Around 12,000 years ago, something terrible happened. Ice samples show it. Rock layers prove it. Ancient people remembered it in flood stories across every land. When the Ice Age ended, ocean levels rose 400 feet. Whole coastlines disappeared. Cities, if they were there, were underwater. Only the tallest buildings survived. Temples on mountains, monuments on high flatlands. The people who rebuilt after had pieces of old knowledge, but not the whole picture. They tried to copy what they found, but couldn't make it as good. What we call ancient Egypt or ancient Sumeria might just be people rebuilding from ruins they didn't fully understand. Tonight we explore what was lost when the ice melted. There are buildings on this planet that shouldn't be here. Stones cut with machine-like sharpness by people who had no machines. Temples lined up with sky patterns by groups who supposedly had no sky knowledge. Cities with sewer systems better than medieval Europe, built when Europe was still covered in ice. For over 100 years, we explained them away. We are running out of explanations. It begins not with a machine, but with stone. Stone that shouldn't be there at its time. Stone cut with sharpness that goes against the tools we believe were available. Stone arranged with knowledge of math, sky study, and building skills that challenges everything we've been taught about how human progress works. History tells us living together in groups is like a ladder. Each generation climbing higher, building on the shoulders of those who came before. Basic tools gave way to bronze, bronze to iron, iron to steel, until we reached the time of computers and spacecraft. But what if that story is backward? What if the farther back we look, the more advanced the proof becomes? Across the planet, in places separated by oceans and thousands of years, a pattern shows up. At Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, hunter-gatherers who shouldn't have had such knowledge raised 20-ton pillars in perfect sky alignment 7,000 years before the pyramids. In Lebanon, the giant stone platform of Baalbek holds stones weighing over 1,200 tons, dug up and placed with sharpness no modern crane can copy. In the Andes, many-sided walls at Sacsayhuaman fit together so perfectly that a knife blade cannot slide between them in a group without iron tools or wheels. In India, the Kailasa temple was carved downward from a mountainside as if stone were clay, removing 400,000 tons of rock without a single building mistake. On Easter Island, 80-ton statues were moved across the land using methods modern engineers are still struggling to understand. These are not myths. These are monuments measured and mapped, standing against our timeline. These monuments span every land and challenge time itself. If you're ready to explore these mysteries with me, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. It helps this story reach others asking the same questions, and drop a comment. Where are you right now as you listen, and what time is it? Let's see how far across the world this ancient pattern reaches tonight. For over 100 years, scientists who study old buildings explained these strange things as exceptions. Impressive, yes, but finally the work of determined groups using simple tools and endless work. But as new tools show what was hidden, that explanation grows harder to believe. Ground-seeing radar finds rooms beneath the Sphinx that come before the pharaohs. Laser scans uncover huge Mayan cities buried under jungle, far larger than anything in the history record. Sound wave mapping shows buildings on the ocean floor off the coasts of India and Japan, underwater when ocean levels rose at the end of the last ice age. Space imaging traces ancient river systems beneath the Sahara, watering lands now empty for 10,000 years. And alongside these physical discoveries, something else shows up, a pattern in the myths. The Egyptians spoke of Zep-Tepi the first time, a time of gods and knowledge that the pharaohs tried to bring back, not create. The Sumerians told of Oannes, a being who came from the sea to teach them writing, math, and law. The people of the Andes honored Viracocha, who appeared after a great flood to reteach living together. The Maya credited Quetzalcoatl with bringing them sky study. In India, Manu saved the knowledge of the world through the flood. Different names, different lands, but the same story. We did not invent this, we inherited it. What if they were telling the truth? What if the tools we see, the sharp stone cutting, the sky alignments, the water systems, The earthquake-resistant building were not the inventions of early farmers trying new ideas, but the recovered memories of something older. Knowledge passed down through generations who survived a disaster we're only now beginning to understand. The rock record speaks of such an event. Around 12,800 years ago, the Earth went through a sudden terrible change known as the Younger Dryas. Evidence suggests a space impact, perhaps a braking comet struck the northern half. The signs are clear. Layers of iridium and platinum in the ice samples of Greenland. Tiny diamonds formed under extreme pressure. Impact spheres of melted rock scattered across lands. Massive wildfires swept North America. Ice sheets fell apart. Ocean levels rose by hundreds of feet. The megafauna, mammoths, mastodons, saber-toothed cats, disappeared almost overnight. And when the world settled down, when the floodwaters went down and the survivors came out, they began to build. Not rough shelters, but monuments. Not random piles of stone, but buildings lined up to the stars, built to withstand earthquakes, designed with math sharpness that would not be rediscovered for thousands of years. The question is no longer whether ancient groups had advanced tools. The proof is carved into mountains, raised on high flat lands, and lined up with the heavens. The question is, who taught them? And why do so many of these tools appear suddenly, fully formed, as if remembered rather than invented? In southeastern Turkey, on a hilltop that commands a view of the surrounding plains, lies the answer to when this knowledge first reappeared. Or perhaps when it was first carved back into stone. But to understand what was built there, we must first understand what came before it. Not the rise of living together, but its silence. 14,000 years ago, the Earth was a different planet. Ice sheets 2 miles thick covered North America and northern Europe. Ocean levels stood 400 feet lower than today, exposing huge coastal plains now drowned beneath the waves. Woolly mammoths grazed across frozen grassland that stretched from Spain to Siberia. Saber-toothed cats hunted alongside humans in forests that would later become desert. The weather was stable. The megafauna thrived. And then, in what amounts to an instant in rock time, everything changed. Across North America, a black mat of carbon marks the same moment in time. The remains of land-spanning wildfires. Impact spherules. Tiny beads of melted rock scatter across the northern half like frozen rain. The rock record speaks clearly. Something from space, perhaps a braking comet, exploded above or struck the northern ice sheets. The weather responded with terrifying speed. Temperatures dropped. The period that followed is known as the Younger Dryas, named after an Arctic wildflower that suddenly appears in the fossil record as forests gave way to frozen grassland. Within a single human lifetime, the ice moved forward again. Ice lakes burst their edges, sending walls of water across lands. Ocean levels rose as ice sheets fell apart, drowning coastal settlements beneath hundreds of feet of ocean. The megafauna, animals that had survived for millions of years, disappeared in a geological eye blink. Mammoths, mastodons, giant ground sloths, saber-toothed cats, gone. If anyone lived through it, they would have stories to tell. And they did. Across the planet, separated by oceans and thousands of years, groups saved the same memory. In ancient Sumer, the gods warned Utnapishtim to build a boat and carry the seed of all living things before the waters rose to eat the world. In India, the first man, Manu, saved humanity by tying his boat to the horn of a divine fish as the flood swallowed the land. In the Andes, the god Viracocha came out of Lake Titicaca after the floodwaters went down to recreate living together from clay. Among the Hopi of North America, the spider grandmother led survivors into caves beneath the earth until the waters went away. Different languages, different symbols, the same pattern: destruction, survival, rebirth. For hundreds of years, scholars dismissed these stories as mythology, beautiful perhaps, but unconnected to real history. But as the rock evidence grew, the line between myth and memory began to blur. What if these weren't stories with lessons or moral tales? What if they were group memories of real events passed down through generations until they hardened into sacred story? The flood myths don't just rhyme with each other. They rhyme with the science. And amid that disaster, amid the rising waters and the dying of species and the collapse of the ice, something amazing happened. Design survived. After so much destruction, why does advanced building appear so early in the dig-up record? Why do the oldest known big buildings show not rough trying but smooth completion? Why does knowledge seem to arrive fully formed, as if it had been waiting in the dark for the world to settle down enough to receive it again? The answer begins at a place that wasn't supposed to be there. Göbekli Tepe sits on a limestone ridge in southeastern Turkey overlooking the plains where farming would later be born. When German scientist Klaus Schmidt began digging up the site in 1995, he expected to find a medieval cemetery. What he uncovered instead rewrote the timeline of human living together. Radiocarbon dating placed the site's building around 9,600 BCE, about 11,600 years ago. To put that in view, it was built more than 7,000 years before the Great Pyramid, 6,000 years before Stonehenge, and at least 5,000 years before the invention of writing. The people who raised these stones were hunter-gatherers. They had no farming, no pottery, no permanent settlements, no tamed animals beyond the dog. According to everything we thought we knew about how living together moves forward, they should have been living in temporary camps, following animal herds, and using stone tools for simple tasks. Instead, they built a temple group that goes against easy explanation. Massive T-shaped pillars, some weighing between 10 and 20 tons, stand arranged in rings at the top of the hill. They are covered with detailed carvings. Foxes, vultures, snakes, scorpions, wild boars, and strange symbols whose meanings remain unknown. The skill is amazing: sharp angles, smooth surfaces, planned design. Computer study of the site's layout suggests that several rings line up with the star group Cygnus, as it would have appeared on the edge of the sky around 10,000 BCE. Other buildings may match Orion. The same star pattern later echoed in the arrangement of Egypt's pyramids. These were not accidental placements. This was planned, calculated, known. But here's what makes Göbekli Tepe truly impossible. It came before everything we connect with living together. No farms fed the workers who dug up and moved these stones. No cities housed them. No kings commanded them. And yet they organized work on a scale that shouldn't have been possible. Moving giant stones without wheels, without metal tools, without work animals, only human hands, rope, and knowledge we can barely rebuild today. Klaus Schmidt, who gave the last 20 years of his life to the site before his death in 2014, called it a cathedral on a hill. Not a home, not a fort, but a place of gathering and ritual, where scattered bands of hunter-gatherers came together to build something that went beyond survival, a place to remember. And when they finished, when the stones stood lined up with the stars and the carvings saved their sacred animals, they did something stranger still. They buried it carefully, on purpose, not through leaving it or natural piling up, but through planned backfilling. Thousands of tons of earth and rubble were used to cover the rings, sealing them away as if the builders were protecting something or closing a chapter they could not bear to leave open. Why? Theories vary. Some scientists believe it was a sacred burial, a way to save the site's power by removing it from the world of the living. Others suggest it was a response to terrible events, a symbolic ending of a time that had ended in fire and flood. Perhaps it was both. Perhaps the survivors who built Göbekli Tepe carried memories of what had been lost. And when they raised those stones in alignment with the heavens, they were not inventing a new way of seeing the cosmos. They were bringing it back. Maybe living together didn't begin here. Maybe living together was being remembered here. If that's true, then Göbekli Tepe is not the starting point. It's an echo, a monument raised by people who still knew what the sky had meant to their ancestors, who still carried pieces of shapes and sky study and sacred purpose through the dark hundreds of years after the disaster. And if hunters just after the Ice Age could raise Göbekli Tepe with such sharpness, such knowledge, such perfect sky alignment, what else did they remember? Why do similar patterns appear in Egypt where the pyramids line up to Orion's belt and the pharaohs claim to be bringing back the wisdom of a first time? Why does Baalbek in Lebanon hold stones weighing over 1,000 tons placed with closeness modern engineers struggle to achieve? Why do the many-sided walls of the Andes fit together like three-dimensional puzzles without glue or blueprints? Why does the Indus Valley show city planning better than anything in Europe for the next 4,000 years? Why does Easter Island, alone in the Pacific, show building rules that shouldn't have been understood without formal math? Why do all of these sites separated by thousands of miles and supposedly unconnected groups feel like echoes of the same forgotten blueprint? The answer may lie not in a single lost group living together, but in something deeper. Inherited memory, knowledge carried forward by survivors, put into myth and monument, waiting for the world to settle down enough to be carved back into stone. And when it was carved, it appeared not as trying but as mastery. By 3000 BCE, two groups living together came up on opposite ends of the Fertile Crescent, both along the banks of great rivers that flooded with seasonal sharpness. In Egypt, the Nile. In Mesopotamia, the Tigris and Euphrates. Both would build cities, develop writing, make law, and line up their monuments to the heavens. Both would claim in their own words that they were not beginning something new, but bringing back something ancient. We call these the cradles of living together. But what if they were not cradles at all? What if they were rebuilds? The Great Pyramid of Giza stands as the most studied building in human history, and yet, its sharpness continues to unsettle modern engineers. About 2.3 million limestone blocks, each weighing an average of 2.5 tons, with some granite blocks in the King's Chamber exceeding 80 tons. The base covers 13 acres and is leveled to within less than an inch across its entire spread, a closeness that would challenge modern building equipment. The sides line up to the main directions with an error of less than 1/15 of a single degree. True north, not magnetic north, which shifts over time, but true north calculated through sky watching. This is not rough monument building. This is math building on a scale that would not be tried again for thousands of years. Regular science studying old things dates the Great Pyramid to around 2560 BCE, built during the rule of Pharaoh Khufu. But even within that regular timeline, something doesn't add up. The pyramid appears in the 4th dynasty, early in Egyptian history, and represents a level of building that the Egyptians themselves never passed. Later pyramids are smaller, less sharp, more likely to fall down. If this were a skill slowly improved over generations, we would expect the opposite, rough early tries giving way to advanced later works. Instead, we see perfection at the beginning followed by decline. The Egyptians had an explanation for this. They called it Zep Tepi the first time. According to their own sacred texts, the knowledge of the pyramids, the math, the sky study, the building did not start with the pharaohs. It came from an earlier time, a time when gods walked the earth and made the rules that humans would later struggle to keep. The pharaohs were not inventors. They were restorers, trying to rebuild what had been known before the chaos, before the flood, before the forgetting. The pyramid texts, among the oldest religious writings in the world, speak of this clearly. They describe the pharaoh's journey to the stars, to Orion and Sirius, to reunite with the source of divine knowledge. The 3 pyramids of Giza are lined up to match the belt stars of Orion, a star group the Egyptians connected with Osiris, the god of death and coming back to life, the one who survived the flood. Even their own stories frame them as inheritors, not starters. 1,000 miles to the east in the river valleys of Mesopotamia, another group living together came up with the same sudden skill. Around 3200 BCE, cuneiform writing appears in Sumer, not as picture symbols scratched into clay by people who couldn't read learning to keep track of grain, but as a fully working system able to record complex management details, trade agreements, sky watching, and religious songs. From the very beginning, it was used to record temple lists, calculate interest on loans, and track the movements of Venus across the sky. There is no proof of a long trying phase. No slow change from simple marks to complex grammar. Writing in Sumer arrives complete, as if someone already knew what a writing system needed to do and simply did it. The same is true of math. The Sumerians used a sexagesimal system, base 60, which we still inherit today. 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour, 360 degrees in a circle. This is not an easy-to-understand system for people counting on their fingers. Base 10 makes sense for humans with 10 fingers. Base 60 suggests something else. A planned choice made for math convenience, particularly for dividing circles and calculating time. Why would an early farming group need such sharpness in circular measuring? Unless they were already watching the sky with the plan to measure it, to track the movements of planets, to calculate sky patterns, to line up their buildings not just to the compass points, but to the cosmos itself. And line them up they did. The ziggurats of Sumer, massive stepped pyramids crowned with temples, were not merely religious buildings. They were platforms for watching, each level going up toward the heavens, each corner pointed to the main directions. The ziggurat of Ur, built around 2100 BCE, shows the same strong lining up to true north that would later appear in Egypt. The same concern for shape sharpness, the same joining of building and sky study. The pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Two separate river-valley groups developing alone according to regular history. Both produce big stone and mud brick building lined up to main directions. Writing systems that appear fully formed rather than changing slowly. Math frameworks based on sky watching. Complex calendars tracking sun and moon patterns. Management systems and law groups showing organized order. Stories centered on gods who taught humans after a great flood. When the Code of Ur-Nammu appears around 2100 BCE, the oldest known law code, it is not a rough draft. It is organized, arranged, complete. Later, the Code of Hammurabi, 1750 BCE, expands on the same rules. Laws arranged by category, punishments matched to social position, legal earlier cases made formal in writing. These are not groups stumbling toward order. These are groups putting in place frameworks that feel remembered rather than invented. The same holds true for their sky knowledge. Both Egypt and Sumer tracked the precession of the equinoxes, a 26,000-year cycle caused by the slow wobble of Earth's axis. To detect precession requires hundreds of years of continuous watching, careful record-keeping, and math skill, yet both groups show awareness of it in their earliest periods, as if the long watching had already been done, and they were simply recording what they'd been taught. How did two separate river groups supposedly inventing living together from scratch come together on such similar sky interests? How did they both know to divide the circle into 360 degrees? How did they both develop writing not slowly but suddenly and completely? How did they both build monuments lined up with sharpness to true north and specific star arrangements? The regular answer is independent invention, that humans when faced with similar challenges will develop similar solutions. But that explanation works for pottery or farming or fishing nets. It doesn't account for identical math systems, identical sky focuses, and identical claims that the knowledge came from before, from teachers who survived a disaster and passed down what they remembered. If Egypt and Sumer represent the blueprint, the template of what living together should look like when it comes up, then the sites beyond their borders represent something even stranger. Because as we move away from the river valleys and into the mountains, the deserts, the jungles, and the islands, the skill doesn't become simpler. It becomes impossible. The stones grow larger. The sharpness becomes finer. The building challenges multiply, and the questions shift from how did they build this with such limited tools to how would we build this even with modern equipment. From the cradle of living together to the edges of the known world. The same pattern repeats, stones that shouldn't be there, cut with closeness that goes against explanation, arranged in ways that suggest knowledge far older than the groups that place them. And the first of these impossible stones rises from the rubble of an ancient platform in the mountains of Lebanon, where blocks weighing over 1,000 tons rest in perfect alignment, placed by hands we cannot identify, using methods we still cannot copy. Baalbek sits in the Bekaa Valley of Lebanon, a fertile corridor between two mountain ranges where trade routes have crossed for thousands of years. Today the site is famous for its Roman temples, the Temple of Jupiter, the Temple of Bacchus, buildings of stunning beauty and classical shape. But beneath the Roman columns, hidden within the foundation of the platform they built upon, lies something far older and far stranger, the trilithon. 3 stones, each measuring about 60 feet long, 14 feet high, and 12 feet thick, each weighing an estimated 800 tons. They sit perfectly fitted together, forming a single course in the western wall of the temple platform, positioned 20 feet above ground level. No glue binds them, no gaps separate them. They simply rest edge to edge, supporting the weight of the Roman building above with a strength that has endured earthquakes, wars, and 2,000 years of weathering. To understand the scale, 800 tons is roughly the weight of 3 fully loaded 747 aircraft. The largest stones moved during the building of the Great Pyramid weighed about 80 tons, 1/10 the weight of a single trilithon block. Modern cranes designed for heavy lifting typically max out around 200 to 300 tons, and they require carefully prepared ground, hydraulic stabilization, and teams of engineers calculating load, sharing to the decimal point. Yet, someone dug up these stones from a site a quarter-mile away, moved them across uneven ground, lifted them 20 feet into the air, and placed them with sharpness that still holds firm. And those aren't even the largest stones at Baalbek. In the digging place itself, still attached to the bedrock, lies a block known as the Stone of the Pregnant Woman, estimated at 1,000 tons. Nearby rests another stone discovered in 2014 and measured at about 1,650 tons, making it the largest worked stone ever recorded. It was shaped, its edges defined, its surfaces smoothed, and then it was left as if the builders stopped mid-project and never returned. The regular explanation gives the trilithon to Roman building, an impressive feat of empire ambition. After all, the temples above are unquestionably Roman, dated to the 1st through 3rd centuries CE. The Romans were master builders, famous for their roads, water channels, and theaters. But even the Romans wrote about their most impressive building projects: Victory Arches, the Colosseum, Hadrian's Wall, and nowhere in their long records is there a description of how to move or lift stones of this size. The heaviest stones the Romans are known to have moved, the columns of the Pantheon and Trajan's Column, weighed around 60 tons. Still impressive, but less than 1/10 the weight of the trilithon. Their pulley, cranes, and wooden frame systems rebuilt by modern engineers show theoretical limits well below what would be needed for 800-ton blocks, which raises an uncomfortable possibility. What if the Romans didn't build the trilithon? What if they built on top of it? Weathering patterns on the lower courses of the platform show wearing away, not matching the Roman temple above. The massive foundation stones appear more worn down, suggesting exposure to the weather for a much longer period before the Roman buildings were put up. Some researchers have suggested that the Romans, arriving at a site already sacred and already built, simply reused what they found, raising their temples on foundations laid by hands unknown, for purposes lost to time. If true, the question becomes, who had the ability to move 800-ton stones in a time before Roman building, before iron tools were widespread, before the math frameworks we consider essential for such projects were written down? And here's where the mystery deepens. Baalbek is not alone. Across the planet, in areas with no contact with each other, the same pattern appears. Cyclopean stones, blocks so massive they seem to belong to a different scale of building. Fitted together with impossible sharpness, often in areas likely to have earthquakes. At Sacsayhuaman, overlooking Cusco in Peru, limestone blocks weighing up to 200 tons are shaped into many-sided forms with as many as 12 angles per stone. They lock together like three-dimensional jigsaw puzzles, fitted so tightly that a knife blade cannot slide between them. No glue, no cement, just stone pressed against stone with closeness measured in tiny fractions of a millimeter. At Tiwanaku and Pumapunku in Bolivia, andesite blocks, one of the hardest stones on Earth, are cut with laser-straight edges and perfectly even right angles. H-shaped grooves identical in size across multiple stones suggest either templates or machine-level sharpness. The surfaces are so smooth they feel polished. And like Baalbek, these stones were moved from digging places miles away across ground that should have made such movement impossible with basic tools. In Japan, the giant stone foundations of Osaka Castle and the underwater formations of Yonaguni show similar features. Massive stones, tight joints, earthquake-resistant building. In Malta, the temples of Gantija are built from limestone blocks weighing over 50 tons, put up thousands of years before the pyramids. In England, the sarsen stones of Stonehenge, though smaller than Baalbek's giants, were moved over 20 miles and raised into position with an understanding of balance and pulling power that still impresses engineers. The shared traits are unmistakable. Stones far larger than needed for simple building. Locking shapes that share stress across multiple contact points. Placement in earthquake areas where their flexibility prevents collapse during earthquakes. No glue or binding materials, relying instead on weight and sharpness. Proof of planning and space calculation that seems beyond the tool context in which they appear. One idea suggests these massive foundations served as earthquake stabilizers, that ancient builders understood how earthquakes move through the ground and designed bases heavy and flexible enough to ride out the shaking. The irregular, many-sided fittings seen at Sacsayhuaman and similar sites would allow the stones to shift slightly during a quake without separating, absorbing energy rather than breaking under it. Another idea explores sound properties. Some researchers have measured vibration frequencies within these giant stone chambers, noting that certain stone arrangements make louder or quieter specific sound wavelengths. Whether this was on purpose, a form of sound building for ritual purposes, or simply a result of the stone's weight and arrangement remains debated. What scientists who study old buildings do agree on, the Roman phase of Baalbek dates to the 1st through 3rd centuries CE. The temple group was dedicated to Jupiter, Bacchus, and Venus. It served as a major religious center in the Roman area of Syria. These facts are well recorded. What remains unexplained, how the trilithon was moved, why stones of such too much weight were chosen when smaller blocks would have worked, whether the platform beneath the Roman buildings comes before them by a lot, and why the same impossible scale of building appears in groups separated by oceans, mountains, and thousands of years. The stones don't answer. They simply remain heavier than history, more sharp than accident, lined up in ways that suggest someone, somewhere, sometime knew exactly what they were doing and why. If the Levant holds stones that go against easy explanation, the Andes take the same mystery and raise it into the mountains, where height itself becomes part of the building problem, and where many-sided walls fit together as if the builders could see through stone itself. The Altiplano, the high plain of the Andes, sits at 12,500 feet above ocean level. At that height, the air is thin. Temperatures swing wildly from day to night, and the ground freezes solid for months each year. Farming is difficult. Breathing is difficult. Moving massive stones across miles of uneven ground should be impossible. And yet, near the southern shore of Lake Titicaca, the ruins of Tiwanaku rise from the grasslands like the remains of a group living together that refused to recognize limits. Radiocarbon dating places the site's major building phase between 500 and 900 CE, though some buildings may be older. At its height, Tiwanaku was a ceremonial and management center serving tens of thousands of people, its influence stretching across the Andean highlands. But what draws researchers and what goes against easy explanation is not the scale of the city, but the sharpness of its stonework. Andesite is a volcanic rock, hard and brittle, ranked at 6 to 7 on the Mohs hardness scale. Shaping it with bronze or copper tools, the metals available to pre-Columbian Andean groups, should produce rough, uneven surfaces. What we find instead at sites like Pumapunku, a section of the Tiwanaku group, are stones cut with closeness that feels factory-made. H-shaped grooves identical across multiple blocks, carved with perfect matching. Right angles measured to tiny fractions of a degree. Surfaces polished smooth as if buffed by machine. Recessed channels and locking bumps designed to fit together in 3 dimensions, requiring not just skill, but space calculation, an ability to picture how each piece would connect before the cutting began. Some researchers argue that the sharpness suggests the use of advanced measuring tools or templates, possibly involving string grids and standard units of length. Others point to proof of harder stone tools, basalt or diorite pounders combined with rough materials like sand and water to slowly wear away the andesite. Trial building has shown that such methods can produce smooth surfaces and straight edges, though the time and work needed would be staggering. What remains unexplained is the sameness. One perfectly cut stone might be given to patience and skill. Dozens of them cut to identical specifications, fitted together in complex arrangements, suggests something more. Organized knowledge, possibly passed down through generations of craftsmen who understood shapes not as thought-only theory, but as hands-on practice. And then there's the building skill. At Tiwanaku, scientists who study old buildings discovered something unexpected: bronze eye clamps. Small metal pieces shaped like the letter I inserted into grooves carved into next-door stones. Melted bronze was poured into the channels, locking the blocks together as the metal cooled and hardened. This is not decorative. This is building support, an early form of what modern engineers would recognize as pulling strengthening. Stone is strong in squeezing but weak in pulling. It resists being crushed, but cracks easily when pulled apart. By tying the blocks together with metal, The builders created a combined building that could flex slightly under stress without separating. In a region where earthquakes are frequent and violent, this is not accidental design. This is earthquake building. The same rule appears hundreds of miles north in the heartland of the Inca Empire, though done with even greater smoothness. At Sacsayhuaman, the massive fort overlooking Cusco, limestone blocks weighing up to 200 tons are fitted together in many-sided patterns, so detailed they seem impossible without computer modeling. Each stone has between 3 and 12 contact faces. Each face cut to match the irregular angles of its neighbors with such sharpness that the joints appear almost welded. No glue, no cement, just stone against stone, held in place by gravity and shape perfection. Run your hand along the seams and you'll find them tighter than the joints in modern stone laying. Try to insert a blade between the blocks and it won't fit. The Spanish conquistadors meeting these walls in the 16th century believed they were the work of demons or giants. No human hands, they thought, could achieve such sharpness. But the Inca did achieve it. The question is how, and more importantly, why. Modern earthquake scientists have studied these many-sided walls and discovered something remarkable. The irregular jointing makes them extremely earthquake-resistant. When earthquake waves pass through the ground, regular rectangular blocks tend to shear along their straight edges, creating breaking points. Many-sided blocks, by contrast, share stress across multiple angles. The stones can shift tiny amounts during a quake, absorbing and spreading energy without breaking apart. The Inca built on one of the most earthquake-active zones on Earth, along the Pacific Ring of Fire, where the Nazca Plate slides beneath the South American Plate, creating frequent and powerful earthquakes. Cusco has been shaken by major quakes throughout history, in 1650, 1950, and 1986. And while Spanish colonial buildings collapsed into rubble, the Inca walls remained standing. This wasn't luck. This was knowledge. The same many-sided building appears at Ollantaytambo, Pisac, and Machu Picchu. All earthquake zones, all built with the same careful attention to locking shapes. The pattern suggests that Andean builders understood stress sharing, weight-bearing movements, and the behavior of stone under earthquake forces. Whether this knowledge came from hands-on watching, seeing how earthquakes damaged earlier buildings and improving their methods, or from inherited rules passed down from earlier people, the result is the same. Building that expects disaster and builds to outlast it. But stone was not the only material the Andean groups mastered. They also built the land itself. On the high plains surrounding Tiwanaku, scientists who study old buildings have mapped the remains of waru-waru, raised farming fields surrounded by water-filled canals. At first glance, they seem wasteful, giving up farmable land to trenches. But the system is brilliant. During the day, the water in the canals absorbs heat from the sun. At night, when temperatures on the Altiplano can drop below freezing, the water releases that stored heat, creating a small weather area that protects the crops from frost. The raised beds ensure drainage, preventing roots from getting waterlogged during the rainy season. Algae and water plants grow in the canals, which are regularly dug up and spread onto the fields as nutrient-rich fertilizer. When researchers in 1982 rebuilt these systems and put them back into use, they found that potato yields increased by 50 to 100% compared to modern methods. A skill thousands of years old outperformed modern farming in the same environment. The Inca expanded this skill with terracing. Carved mountainsides transformed into stepped fields that controlled washing away, captured rainwater, and created dozens of different small weather areas on a single slope. Each terrace level could grow different crops suited to its specific temperature and moisture conditions, effectively multiplying the productive capacity of the land. This isn't trial and error. This is systems thinking and understanding of water science, heat science, and nature science built into building design. And then there's sound. At Tiwanaku's Kalasasaya Temple, a raised platform enclosed by standing stones, sound researchers have measured unusual vibration properties. Certain frequencies get louder within the enclosure, while others are quieted. Some scholars have suggested that the spacing and weight of the stones create a kind of sound chamber, possibly used for ritual chanting or ceremonial music. Whether this was on purpose remains debated, but it fits a broader pattern seen in giant stone sites worldwide. spaces that seem designed not just for visual lining up with the stars but for sound interaction with human voice and rhythm. Sound is energy. Vibration is the making louder of that energy at specific frequencies. If ancient builders understood that stone could be tuned, that weight and shape and spacing could filter and focus vibration, then their skill was not limited to the mechanical. It was complete, bringing together building, environment, sky study, and human experience into a unified design thinking. The real ancient skill may not have been machines but mastery of shapes, of vibration, of how energy moves through matter and how humans move through space. The pattern holds. In Egypt, lining up to the stars and main directions. In Sumer, math and timekeeping. At Baalbek, stones too large for known lifting methods. In the Andes, earthquake-proof walls, farming systems that work with weather rather than against it, and sound spaces that may have made louder ritual and memory. Separate lands, different materials, the same basic rules. Watch the environment, understand its forces, build in harmony with what cannot be controlled, and put that knowledge into buildings meant to outlast forgetting. The Andean builders matched their building with earthquake reality, thin air, extreme temperatures, and the movements of the sky. They didn't conquer nature. They learned its language and spoke back in stone, water, and earth. And they were not alone in this approach. Across another ocean, in a river valley that would become the cradle of one of history's most advanced city groups, people were building cities where water flowed through every street and where shapes dictated not just temples but entire towns. The Indus Valley group living together came up around 3300 BCE in what is now Pakistan and northwest India along the fertile floodplains of the Indus River and its branches. By 2600 BCE, at the height of its development, it covered an area larger than ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia combined, including over 1,000 settlements. Yet, for all its scale, it remains one of history's quietest empires. No grand palaces, no warrior kings made permanent in stone, no victory writings celebrating conquest. What it left instead was something stranger. Cities so sensibly planned, so organized that they seem less like the natural growth of human settlement and more like blueprints done with planned sharpness. Walk through the ruins of Mohenjo-Daro or Harappa and the first thing you notice is the grid. Streets cross at right angles, dividing the city into rectangular blocks. Main avenues run north, south, and east-west, lined up to the main directions with the same strong accuracy seen in Egypt and Sumer. The buildings themselves are built from standard bricks, not random sizes, but even sizes following a sharp ratio of 1:4, thickness to width to length. Thousands upon thousands of bricks, all following the same math relationship. This is not accidental. This is quality control on a factory scale. But the true genius of the Indus cities lies beneath the streets. Every major settlement had a covered sewage system, not open ditches or waste pits, but built drainage networks with clay pipes, inspection chambers, and soak pits. Wastewater from private homes flowed through channels built into the walls, connecting to main sewers that ran beneath the streets, sloped for best flow, and emptied outside the city limits. Individual houses had bathing platforms with drains. Public wells provided clean water. Waste and fresh water were kept strictly separate. Compare this to medieval Europe where chamber pots were emptied into the streets and open sewers bred plague. Compare it to London in the 1850s when the Great Stink forced Parliament to finally address the fact that the city's waste was flowing directly into the Thames. The Indus Valley had solved these problems 4,000 years earlier, and they did it without writing that we can read. The Indus script remains one of studying old buildings' great mysteries. Found on thousands of seals, pottery pieces, and tablets, it consists of picture symbols, animals, shape symbols, human figures arranged in short sequences. Despite decades of effort, no one has successfully figured it out. We don't know what language it represents. We don't know if it's a full writing system or a form of symbol notation. What we do know is that it was used for trade, management, and possibly ritual purposes. The seals show standard weights and measures, another sign of organized order. The same units of weight appear across the entire group living together, from coastal Gujarat to the Punjab highlands, suggesting either central control or widely accepted agreements. Yet there are no big writings, no king lists, no temple walls covered with the deeds of rulers. The Indus Valley governed itself not through the worship of personality but through systems, standard infrastructure, predictable city layouts, and shared skill frameworks. This absence of obvious hierarchy puzzles scientists who study old buildings. Where are the palaces, the weapons, storage places, and fortress walls that mark other Bronze Age groups living together? The largest buildings at Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa are the Great Baths, public bathing groups with waterproof floors and detailed drainage. Not thrones, not armories, baths. It's as if the Indus people valued cleanliness, order, and group infrastructure over the showing of individual power. And somehow across an area spanning hundreds of thousands of square miles, they kept that system for over 1,000 years. Ancient building doesn't just rival modern city management. In some ways, it passes it. When British engineers first surveyed the region in the 19th century, they unknowingly used thousands of Indus Valley bricks as railway stones, perfectly fired, perfectly shaped, still usable after 4,000 years. Meanwhile, the covered sewage systems they were uncovering came before anything comparable in Europe by 3,000 years. The Indus cities weren't just working. They were made better, pointed to catch common winds for airflow, designed with wide streets to make easy movement and trade, built with flood control in mind, raising platforms above seasonal water levels. Every element served a purpose, and every purpose showed an understanding of water science, shapes, public health, and environmental planning. How does a group living together achieve this level of skill so early in the dig-up record? Where is the trying phase? The failed cities with poor drainage and collapsing walls. They should be there. They don't exist. When the Indus Valley group living together declined around 1900 BCE, possibly due to weather shifts and the drying of the Ghaggar River, its rules didn't disappear. They echoed forward into later Indian culture, put not in undecoded seals but in building thinking. Vasta Shastra, the ancient Indian science of building, makes formal rules that feel continuous with Indus planning, pointing to main directions, shape matching, the bringing together of buildings with natural energy flows. Sacred shapes aren't just decoration. It's a framework for lining up human buildings with cosmic order. The golden ratio, the square root of 2, the progress of matching sizes, all appear in texts describing how temples, homes, and cities should be arranged. Some scholars suggest this represents group continuity, a passing of space thinking from the Indus people through spoken tradition into the classical Hindu building rules. Whether direct inheritance or parallel development, the result is the same, a building thinking that treats shapes as sacred and buildings as go-betweens between earth and heaven. And nowhere is this thinking done with more boldness than at Ellora. The Kailasa temple, carved into the basalt cliffs of Ellora in the 8th century CE, goes against every reasonable assumption about pre-modern building. It was not built. It was dug out. The builders began at the top of the cliff and carved downward, removing an estimated 400,000 tons of rock to create a freestanding temple within a horseshoe-shaped courtyard. The building rises over 100 feet high, spans 160 feet in length, and includes detailed sculptures, pillared halls, multi-story pavilions, and a massive central shrine, all cut from a single continuous rock face. No blocks were dug up and put together. No stones were moved. The entire group was taken away from the mountain itself as if stone were clay and the builders could simply scoop away what they didn't need. The sharpness required is staggering. Carve too much and a pillar collapses. Miscalculate the weight-bearing ability of a ceiling and the entire chamber caves in. Make an error in space planning and sections fail to line up. There is no room for trial and error when you're working in reverse. When every cut is permanent and every mistake can't be undone. Yet the Kailasa temple shows no major building failures. No obvious corrections or left-behind tries. The carvings are matching. The sizes are matching. The drainage channels direct rainwater away from weak areas. Someone planned this in 3 dimensions, in their mind or on some medium now lost, and did it with such exactness that the building has stood for 1200s of years. How did they picture it? How did they measure the removal of hundreds of thousands of tons of stone to ensure that what remained would support itself? Modern engineers struggle to explain the planning method. Some suggest the use of detailed scale models. Others point to the tradition of Shilpa Shastras, ancient building manuals that gave sharp ratios and sizes. But even with manuals, the leap from theory to doing is breathtaking. The Kailasa temple isn't just building. It's proof of concept. Proof that ancient builders thought in systems, calculated in space, and understood building forces at a level we still find difficult to rebuild. From the planned cities of the Indus where shapes governed streets and water flowed where it was meant to the rock-cut impossibility of Kailasa where a mountain became a temple through taking away. India shows the same pattern seen in Egypt, Sumer, the Andes, and Baalbek. Knowledge that appears complete, systems that work immediately, and building that feels inherited rather than invented. While India carved mountains and planned cities according to shape laws older than their texts, another world across the ocean was building pyramids that doubled as calendars, temples that sang when touched, and sky-watching places that tracked Venus with sharpness that wouldn't be matched in Europe until the Renaissance. In the jungles of the Yucatan Peninsula, where limestone dissolves into sinkholes and rivers run underground through caverns carved by thousands of years of rain, the Maya built cities that put time itself into stone. At Chichen Itza, the pyramid known as El Castillo, the Temple of Kukulkan, performs a trick of light twice each year that feels less like building and more like sky theater. During the spring and autumn equinoxes, as the sun goes down toward the horizon, shadows cast by the pyramid's stepped edges create the picture of a serpent slithering down the northern staircase. 7 triangles of light and shadow form the body, ending at the carved serpent head at the base. For about 45 minutes, the effect holds, an undulating snake of light connecting the sky to the earth, before the sun's angle shifts and the image dissolves. This is not coincidence. The pyramid has 9 terrace levels, each divided by a staircase, creating exactly the shapes needed to create the shadow pattern at the equinox. The builders had to understand not just the sun's yearly path, but the exact angle of light at specific times of year, the height and depth of each terrace, and the pointing of the building to true north. But the pyramid's sharpness doesn't end with light. Stand at the base of El Castillo and clap your hands sharply. The echo that returns doesn't sound like a hand clap. It sounds like the chirp of a bird, specifically the call of the Quetzal, a bird sacred to the Maya and connected with Kukulkan himself. Sound researchers have confirmed that the stepped pyramid face creates a happening called diffraction, where sound waves bouncing off each terrace arrive at slightly different times, producing a combined frequency that copies the Quetzal's call. Was this on purpose? The math of sound suggests it was. The spacing of the terraces, the angle of the steps, and the material of the stone all add to the effect. It happens too regularly across too many pyramids in the region to be accidental. The Maya put sound into their building, transforming ritual spaces into instruments that responded to human voice and gesture. A few hundred meters from El Castillo stands El Caracol, the snail, named for the spiral staircase inside its round tower. Modern scientists who study old buildings recognize it as a sky-watching place. Windows and sightlines within the building line up with the rising and setting positions of Venus at its extreme northern and southern points, events that happen every 8 years in the planet's synodic cycle. Other openings mark the summer and winter solstices. The building itself is pointed not to the main directions but to the northernmost setting position of Venus, suggesting that the Maya put sky watching first over regular alignment. Why Venus? Because the Maya tracked it with strong sharpness. Their sky tables recorded in codices that survived the Spanish conquest calculated Venus's 584-day synodic period with an error of only 2 hours over 500 years. They understood that 5 Venus cycles equaled 8 Earth years. A math harmony they wove into their calendars, their stories, and their monuments. Their solar calendar, the Hab, consisted of 365 days, accurate to within minutes of the true solar year. But they didn't stop there. They also used the Tsokin, a 260-day ritual calendar, and the long count, a continuous day count tracking time from a story-based starting point in 3114 BCE. These 3 calendars locked together, creating cycles within cycles. A time machinery so complex that specific date combinations repeated only once every 52 years. And the full arrangement took over 18,000 years to complete. This is not basic timekeeping. This is math sky study advanced enough that Spanish priests meeting it in the 16th century could barely understand its detail. And while the Maya were mapping the heavens, they were also mastering the earth beneath their feet. The Yucatan Peninsula has no surface rivers. Rain disappears almost immediately into the porous limestone karst, flowing through underground cave systems to the sea. For any group living together to survive here, water management becomes survival itself. The Maya responded with building adapted exactly to their environment. They built reservoirs to capture seasonal rainfall, lined them with plaster to prevent seepage, and built filtration systems using layers of sand and gravel. They identified natural sinkholes, cenotes, and built settlements around them. Where no cenotes existed, they carved artificial channels to direct runoff into storage systems. At Tikal, one of the largest Maya cities, scientists who study old buildings have mapped a detailed network of canals, dams, and reservoirs able to sustain tens of thousands of people through the dry season. The system required water building, calculating slopes, managing flow rates, preventing washing away, done in a landscape where a single miscalculation could mean drought and famine. To the west, in the Valley of Mexico, the Aztecs took water building to even greater extremes. Tenochtitlan, the Aztec capital, was built on an island in the middle of a shallow lake, Lake Texcoco. By the time the Spanish arrived in 1519, it was one of the largest cities in the world, home to over 200,000 people, crisscrossed by canals, and connected to the mainland by massive causeways. The lake was brackish, undrinkable. The Aztecs solved this with aqueducts that brought fresh water from springs miles away, carried on raised stone channels that crossed the lake. They built dikes to separate the fresh and saltwater zones, controlling flooding and keeping water quality. And they transformed the shallow lake bed into farmland using chinampas, artificial islands built from layers of mud, vegetation, and woven reeds. Chinampas were farming marvels, anchored to the lake bottom with willow trees whose roots held firm the soil. They provided year-round growing space. The canals between them offered watering, moving things, and a source of nutrient-rich muck that farmers regularly dug up and spread on the fields. Modern studies estimate that chinampa farming produced up to 7 harvests per year, feeding a population density that rivaled or exceeded modern European cities. When Hernán Cortés first saw Tenochtitlan, he compared it to Venice. But Venice didn't feed itself from its canals. The Aztecs did. And here in the jungles and lakes of Mesoamerica, plot twist emerges again. The same numbers, the same sky codes, the same sacred shapes that appeared in Egypt, Sumer, and the Indus Valley reappear on the opposite side of the planet. Precession. The 26,000-year wobble of Earth's axis shows up in Maya mythology and calendar calculations. Solar alignments mark equinoxes and solstices at Chichen Itza, Monte Alban, and Teotihuacan just as they do at Stonehenge, Newgrange, and the pyramids of Giza. The division of the circle into 360 degrees. The use of the golden ratio in building sizes. The strong interest in main directions and sky cycles. These are not inventions alone to one group. They are a pattern. How did the Maya, alone by ocean and jungle from the Old World, arrive at the same math and sky frameworks? Why did they put sound into their pyramids just as the builders of Tiwanaku and Newgrange seem to have done? Why does their building show the same joining of building and cosmos that appears in groups living together they could never have contacted? The regular answer, independent invention, strains under the weight of specifics. The details come together too sharply, too often across too many areas. As the Maya listened to the stars and the Aztecs built floating gardens, on the far side of the Pacific, another group living together was learning to hear the earth itself, measuring its tremors, lining up their buildings to invisible forces, and putting cosmic balance into bronze, silk, and stone. In ancient China, skill was never merely practical. It was cosmic, an expression of the belief that heaven, earth, and humanity existed in changing balance, and that tools, buildings, and knowledge were meant to harmonize with forces larger than themselves. This thinking produced inventions that seem contradictory. Instruments of sharpness built to measure the invisible. Machines designed to mirror the movements of the cosmos, and systems of knowledge that treated magnetic fields, earthquake waves, and sky cycles as parts of a unified reality. In 132 CE, during the Han Dynasty, the scholar Zhang Heng presented the imperial court with a device unlike anything seen before, a bronze vessel nearly 6 feet across, decorated with 8 dragon heads, each holding a bronze ball in its jaws. Below each dragon sat a bronze toad, mouth open, waiting. Zhang Heng called it the Hofeng Didong Yi, the instrument for measuring the seasonal winds and the movements of the earth. We call it the first seismoscope. When an earthquake happened, even hundreds of miles away, the device would detect it. A pendulum mechanism inside the vessel, finely balanced and hung, would swing in the direction of the earthquake waves. This motion triggered a lever that released one of the bronze balls, which would drop into the matching toad's mouth with a sharp sound, showing the direction of the disturbance. History records describe a moment when the seismoscope released a ball, but no one in the capital felt an earthquake. Days later, a messenger arrived reporting a major quake several hundred miles to the west, exactly the direction the device had shown. For over 1,000 years, historians debated whether such a device could actually work. Then, in the 20th century, earthquake scientists and engineers built rebuilds based on Zhang Heng's descriptions. The rule is sound. A pendulum inside a vibrating chamber matched to respond to specific frequencies of ground motion can detect distant earthquakes before human senses register them. The design works, but here's what matters. Zhang Heng didn't invent earthquake science. He organized it. His device suggests a long tradition of watching earthquakes, understanding their directional spread, and recognizing that the earth itself speaks in tremors if you know how to listen. Even earlier, the Chinese had learned to listen to the invisible pull of the Earth's magnetic field. The first compasses were not used for sea travel. They were used for feng shui, the art of lining up buildings with the flow of qi, the vital energy believed to move through landscapes, mountains, and rivers. A magnetized lodestone spoon placed on a polished bronze plate marked with directional markings would rotate to point south. This allowed geomancers to point tombs, temples, and homes in harmony with the main directions and the surrounding landscape. The earliest written reference to such a device appears in texts from the 4th century BCE, though the practice may be older. For hundreds of years, the compass remained a tool of cosmic alignment, not travel. Only later, by the 11th century CE, did Chinese sailors begin using magnetic compasses for sea travel, a skill that would eventually spread to the Islamic world and then to Europe, transforming global exploration. But the priority reveals something important. The Chinese met magnetism not as a curiosity but as a force to be brought into a worldview where heaven and earth were mirror images and where human buildings should show sky order. In 105 CE, Kai Luan, an official in the Han court, standardized the production of paper from mulberry bark, hemp, and rags. Paper had existed in rougher forms before him, but Kai Luan improved the process, creating a material light enough to carry, smooth enough to write on, and cheap enough to produce at scale. The result was an explosion of literacy and record-keeping. Within hundreds of years, paper replaced bamboo slips and silk as the main medium for writing. Knowledge that had been expensive to save became accessible. Libraries expanded. Management groups grew more efficient. Scientific watchings, sky tables, history records, and thinking treatises multiplied. Paper was not just a medium, it was an amplifier of culture, allowing ideas to spread faster and farther than ever before. Meanwhile, in the laboratories of Taoist alchemists searching for the elixir of living forever, another discovery came up. This one far more explosive. By the 9th century CE, experiments with sulfur, charcoal, and saltpeter produced huayao fire medicine. We call it gunpowder. Initially, it was used for display. Fireworks, flares, and ritual displays meant to ward off evil spirits during festivals. The sudden flash and thunder were cosmic theater, echoing the power of lightning and thunder, forces connected with heaven's judgment. Only later did military engineers weaponize it, creating fire lances, bombs, and rockets. Both inventions, paper and gunpowder, arrived not through step-by-step trial and error, but as smooth systems. The chemistry of gunpowder, the paper-making process. Both appear in history records already working, already made better, suggesting long periods of trying we can no longer trace. And then there are the machines that mirrored the heavens. Armillary spheres, bronze rings arranged to represent the celestial equator. The ecliptic and the meridian allowed Chinese sky scientists to model the movements of stars and planets. These were not still diagrams, but instruments of calculation used to predict eclipses, track solstices, and watch planetary conjunctions with remarkable sharpness. By the 11th century, the engineer Su Song built a water-powered sky clock over 30 feet tall. It combined an armillary sphere with a celestial globe and a mechanized timekeeping system driven by a water wheel with an escapement mechanism, a device that controlled the flow of water to ensure consistent movement. Every quarter hour, the mechanism moved forward, moving wooden figures to strike bells and drums, announcing the time in harmony with the stars. This was not a clock in the modern sense, ticking off abstract seconds. It was a cosmic engine, synchronizing human time with celestial time, showing the rule that heaven and earth moved as one locking system. Modern historians of science recognize Su Song's clock as a forerunner to mechanical clockwork in Europe, though it came up hundreds of years earlier. But within Chinese cosmology, it was something else. A demonstration that the rules governing the stars could be reproduced in bronze and water, that human cleverness could echo the structure of the universe. Skills appear fully formed, not as rough prototypes. The seismoscope, the compass, paper, gunpowder, the sky clock, each arrives in history records already advanced, already working. Chinese skill was never separated from thinking. The seismoscope didn't just detect earthquakes. It kept the emperor's connection to the mandate of heaven by watching cosmic disturbances. The compass lined up human dwellings with universal forces. The sky clock synchronized ritual with the heavens. Even gunpowder, before it became a weapon, was a tool for cosmic display. This is complete skill, building inseparable from cosmology. Tools designed not just to solve problems but to harmonize human action with invisible patterns. From Egypt's alignment to Orion to Sumer's base 60 math to the Maya's Venus tables to China's instruments for measuring the unseen, the same impulse repeats. The belief that knowledge is not invented from nothing but recovered, drawn from watching of cycles larger than individual lives, put into buildings and systems meant to outlast the forgetting. While China measured the tremors of the earth and modeled the heavens in bronze and water, out in the Pacific and island people were moving mountains with song, moving 80-ton statues across empty landscapes using nothing but rope, rhythm, and an understanding of balance that modern engineers are only beginning to rebuild. While China measured the tremors of the earth and modeled the heavens in bronze and water, out in the Pacific and island people were moving mountains with song, moving 80-ton statues across empty landscapes using nothing but rope, rhythm, and an understanding of balance that modern engineers are only beginning to rebuild. Easter Island, Rapa Nui to its inhabitants, is one of the most alone places on Earth. The nearest inhabited land lies over 1,200 miles away. It is a volcanic speck in the vast emptiness of the Pacific. Barely 64 square miles of windswept grass and stone. And yet, on this remote island, Polynesian settlers carved nearly 900 statues from volcanic tuff, some standing over 30 feet tall and weighing up to 80 tons. The moai, as they're called, weren't put up where they were carved. They were moved, sometimes miles from the digging place at Reino Ruraku to ceremonial platforms around the island's edge. The regular assumption for decades was that the statues were dragged flat on wooden sledges or rollers, requiring massive workforces and vast amounts of timber. But experiments in the 1980s and 2010s revealed something startling. The statues may have been moved upright, walking across the landscape. By attaching ropes to the statue's head and base, small teams of people, sometimes fewer than 20, could rock the moai forward in a rhythmic side-to-side motion. The statue's center of gravity, carefully calculated in its design, allowed it to pivot on its rounded base without toppling. Step by step, coordinated through chant and rhythm, the statues moved forward across the ground like massive stone puppets. Impossible stones moved without trees, without wheels, without work animals, just human coordination, hands-on understanding of physics, and rhythm as a tool for synchronization. The island's challenges were extreme. By the time European explorers arrived in 1722, Rapa Nui had been almost entirely deforested. Whether through overuse, drought, or rat-eating of palm seeds remains debated. Without large trees, the islanders had no timber for boats able to make long voyages, no wood for rollers or sledges in the amounts earlier theories required. And yet the statues had been moved. The platforms had been built. The island had sustained a population of thousands. The solution lay not in factory scale, but in knowledge, understanding, leverage, balance, and the physics of motion so closely that brute force became unnecessary. Easter Island holds another mystery. Rongo, a writing system found on wooden tablets unique to the island. The glyphs, stylized humans, birds, fish, and shape symbols, are arranged in a rare format called reverse boustrophedon, where each line changes direction and is read upside down relative to the previous line. No one has successfully figured it out. The script may represent a full language, a mnemonic system for spoken recitation, or a calendar and ritual notation. What matters is its existence, an independent development of writing in one of the most alone places on Earth, suggesting that literacy and symbol encoding were not confined to river valleys and farming empires, but could come up wherever humans needed to save knowledge across generations. But the true skill genius of the Pacific Islanders wasn't recorded in stone or script. It lived in their bodies and their minds. Polynesian navigators crossed thousands of miles of open ocean in double-hulled canoes without maps, compasses, or written charts. They navigated by stars, reading their rising and setting points along the horizon. They read ocean swells, detecting the subtle interference patterns created when waves bounced off distant islands still below the horizon. They watched birds, certain species that flew out to fish during the day, but returned to land each night, pointing the way. They observed clouds, noting how fluffy formations tend to gather over islands, visible from miles away. This wasn't guesswork. It was hands-on science passed through spoken tradition, apprenticeship, and learned practice. Navigators memorized star compasses, mental maps of the sky divided into directional houses, tracking the positions of stars as they rose and set throughout the year. They learned to feel the direction of swells beneath the hull, distinguishing between wind-driven chop and the deeper, steadier rhythms of ocean currents. Modern rebuilds of Polynesian voyaging canoes sailed by navigators trained in traditional methods have successfully completed journeys of over 2,000 miles using only these methods, proving what Western scholars once dismissed as impossible. For hundreds of years, European anthropologists underestimated Polynesian abilities, assuming that alone island populations couldn't possess advanced skills. The statues of Easter Island were given to lost continents or extraterrestrial visitors. Polynesian seafaring was dismissed as accidental drift rather than planned exploration. The proof now proves otherwise, through trial and error but suddenly complete, working, as if inherited rather than invented. This is not coincidence. This is a pattern, and patterns suggest structure. And now modern skill is revealing just how much we haven't seen. Ground-seeing radar scans beneath the Sphinx and the Giza Plateau have detected empty spaces, chambers, and passages that come before the known building phases, hinting at layers of history still buried beneath the sand. LiDAR, light detection, and ranging has transformed our understanding of the Maya world, revealing vast city networks hidden under jungle canopy, far larger and more interconnected than the visible ruins suggested. Entire city systems invisible from the ground, mapped in days. Soundwave surveys off the coasts of India and Japan have found underwater buildings, walls, platforms, stone arrangements resting on ocean floors that were dry land when ocean levels were lower before the Ice Age ended and the oceans rose. Space imaging has traced ancient river systems beneath the Sahara, dry for 10,000 years, showing where water once flowed through landscapes now empty, supporting populations we can only guess from the absence of ruins. The Earth is giving up its secrets. And the deeper we look, the older the proof becomes, which brings us to the question that ties everything together. What if history is not a line but a spiral? What if living together doesn't progress in a single upward arc from basic to advanced but moves in cycles, rising, falling, forgetting, and remembering? The Younger Dryas stands as proof of such a cycle. A global disaster 12,800 years ago that reset the world, drowning coastlines, collapsing ice sheets, wiping out megafauna, and scattering survivors into a landscape transformed. And in the aftermath, knowledge reappeared not as invention, but as restoration. The survivors built not rough shelters, but skyline temples. They put not simple tallies, but complex calendars. They moved not small stones, but giant stones. They acted as if they were rebuilding something they remembered. The skills that shouldn't have existed may not be strange things. They may be survivals, pieces carried forward by people who witnessed the disaster, who saved what they could, and who passed it down through story, ritual, and stone until the world settled down enough to carve it back into permanence. But here's the deeper realization. The real ancient skill wasn't machines. It was consciousness. It was the ability to watch the sky for generations and recognize patterns invisible to a single lifetime. It was the capacity to observe earthquakes, floods, and seasons and put that knowledge into buildings that would outlast the observers. It was understanding vibration, how sound moves through stone, how energy flows through water, how shapes harmonize space with cosmos. It was pattern recognition at a group living together scale. Long-term thinking, the bringing together of environment, sky study, sound, and memory into systems so complete they feel almost biological. Knowledge wasn't stored in books or hard drives. It was put in alignments, in the spacing of pillars, in the angles of walls, in myths that rhymed with rock science, in calendars that counted not years but ages. The ancients didn't lack skill. They had a different skill, one that put first permanence over convenience, harmony over control, memory over progress. And so we arrive at the final question, the one that connects us to everyone who has ever looked up at the stars and wondered, are we the first advanced group living together or just the latest? When future scientists who study old buildings sift through the ruins of our cities, if such scientists exist, will they marvel at our steel and silicon? Will they ask how we built towers so tall, moved information so fast, split atoms and sequenced genomes? Will they say our skills shouldn't have existed for our time? Or will they find only the stones that outlasted everything else? The dams, the bridges, the foundations, and wonder as we do now what we knew and how we knew it. The pattern suggests this has happened before. That knowledge rises and falls like tides. That forgetting is as unavoidable as remembering. That we are not climbing towards some final summit, but walking a spiral that curves back on itself. Each group living together retracing steps taken by those who came before. Each one believing itself to be the first. Perhaps the ruins we study are not remains of the basic, but reflections of ourselves in another age, builders who also watched the stars, who also sought to leave something permanent, who also believed their knowledge would endure. So tonight, wherever you are, in a city of steel and light, or under a sky still dark enough to see the stars, consider this. Where are you listening from tonight? And in which cycle of history do you think you've awakened?